Number 1. The pollen that trapped a killer in May 1992. The quiet suburban neighborhood of Phoenix, Arizona became the focal point of one of the most innovative forensic investigations in American history, forever changing how investigators approach environmental evidence. When 48-year-old Denise Johnson disappeared after leaving work at a local medical clinic, her family immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Denise was a creature of habit, a devoted mother of two who never missed her daughter's soccer practices and always called if she would be even 5 minutes late. When she failed to pick up her youngest child from school and didn't answer repeated phone calls, her husband Mark reported her missing within hours. The initial investigation yielded frustratingly little evidence. Denise's car was found abandoned in a shopping center parking lot 3 miles from her workplace. Keys still in the ignition, her purse on the passenger seat with wallet and phone intact. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, and no clear direction for investigators to pursue. The case quickly went cold until 2 weeks later when a hiker discovered Denise's body in a remote desert area approximately 40 miles from where her car had been found. She had been strangled, and her body showed signs of having been transported post-mortem. The crime scene offered little in terms of traditional evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA, no tire tracks that could be meaningfully traced. However, a forensic botanist named Dr. Timothy Miller was brought onto the case at the suggestion of a detective who had attended a conference on emerging forensic techniques. Dr. Miller carefully collected samples of pollen and plant materials from Denise's clothing and hair, as well as from the area where her body was discovered. What he found was extraordinary. 2 distinct types of pollen that, when combined, created a botanical fingerprint so specific that it could only have come from a very limited geographic area. One type was from a palo verde tree, common in Arizona but with distinct DNA markers that varied by location. The other was from a more rare flowering shrub that grew in only certain microclimates. By analyzing the specific subspecies and combination of these pollens, Dr. Miller was able to narrow down the likely location where Denise had been killed to an area of approximately 2 square miles in an industrial district on the outskirts of Phoenix. Investigators began canvassing this area systematically, interviewing business owners and examining properties. Their attention soon focused on a commercial warehouse owned by 52-year-old Richard Benson, who had been questioned early in the investigation due to a prior complaint Denise had filed against him for harassment months before her disappearance. Benson had been a frequent visitor to the medical clinic where Denise worked, ostensibly for legitimate medical appointments, but staff had reported that he made Denise uncomfortable with his persistent attempts to engage her in personal conversation despite her clear lack of interest. When investigators obtained a warrant to search Benson's warehouse property, they found the exact combination of vegetation that matched the pollen profile, several mature palo verde trees and multiple specimens of the rare shrub growing along the property's fence line. Soil samples from the warehouse loading dock contained traces of the same pollen found on Denise's clothing. Further investigation revealed that Benson had rented a carpet cleaning van the day after Denise's disappearance, and microscopic fiber analysis showed that fibers from Denise's clothing matched carpeting in that vehicle. Confronted with this evidence, Benson's story began to fall apart. He initially claimed he had been at home alone on the day of Denise's disappearance, but security camera footage from a gas station near the warehouse showed his vehicle there during the time frame investigators had established. Cell phone tower records placed his phone in the same area, and further placed it along the route to where Denise's body was ultimately discovered. The pollen evidence, however, remained the linchpin of the prosecution's case. Dr. Miller testified extensively about the statistical improbability of finding that specific combination of pollens anywhere except the defendant's property and the immediate surrounding area. He explained to the jury how pollen adheres to clothing and hair, how it can be traced to very specific locations, and how the science of forensic botany had been validated through numerous academic studies. The defense attempted to argue that pollen could have transferred innocently, but the prosecution demonstrated that Denise had never been to that industrial area and had no reason to have ever been near Benson's warehouse. Combined with the circumstantial evidence of Benson's obsessive behavior, the rental van fibers, and his inconsistent statements to police, the pollen evidence proved overwhelming. In March 1994, Richard Benson was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case marked the first time in U.S. legal history that pollen evidence played such a central role in securing a murder conviction, and it opened the door for forensic botany to become a recognized and increasingly utilized tool in criminal investigations. Today, forensic botanists regularly consult on criminal cases, and pollen databases have been created to help investigators match samples to specific geographic locations. Dr. Miller's work on the Johnson case earned him recognition within the forensic science community and led to the establishment of protocols for collecting and analyzing botanical evidence at crime scenes. For Denise Johnson's family, the conviction brought a measure of closure, though the pain of losing a beloved wife and mother could never be erased. Her daughter, who was only 12 when her mother was murdered, went on to become a victim's advocate, working to ensure that families of crime victims receive support throughout the often lengthy and traumatic legal process. The case also prompted changes in how restraining orders and harassment complaints are handled in Arizona, with new protocols requiring more thorough documentation and follow-up when individuals report feeling threatened or unsafe. Mark Johnson eventually remarried but said in a later interview that he remained grateful to the investigators who refused to let his wife's case go unsolved, and particularly to Dr. Miller, whose expertise in an obscure field brought justice when traditional forensic methods had failed. Number 2. The Parrot Witness. In June 2015, the small town of Enfield, Michigan became the unlikely setting for one of the strangest pieces of evidence ever presented in an American courtroom when an African gray parrot became a key witness in a murder investigation. Martin Durham, a 45-year-old auto mechanic, was found shot to death in his home, and his wife Glenna Durham, 49, was severely wounded with a gunshot to the head but survived. When police arrived at the scene after neighbors reported hearing gunshots, they found what initially appeared to be a tragic murder-suicide attempt. Glenna was rushed to the hospital where she underwent emergency surgery and eventually recovered, though she claimed to have no memory of the events due to her traumatic brain injury. She told investigators that she and Martin had been having marital problems but insisted that they had been working on their relationship. She suggested that perhaps an intruder had broken into their home, though there was no evidence of forced entry and nothing appeared to have been stolen. The case might have remained classified as unsolved or possibly a murder-suicide if not for Bud, the couple's 5-year-old African gray parrot. In the weeks following the shooting, Martin's parents took custody of Bud, and they soon noticed something disturbing. The parrot began repeatedly squawking phrases in 2 distinct voices, one mimicking Martin's voice and one mimicking Glenna's. Most chillingly, Bud would say in Martin's voice, "Don't shoot," followed by arguing sounds, and then mimicking the sound of gunshots. Martin's mother, Christina Durham, was deeply troubled by this behavior and believed the parrot was reenacting what he had witnessed the night of the murder. She contacted the lead investigator, Detective Laura Chun, and invited her to hear Bud's disturbing repertoire. Detective Chun was initially skeptical but decided to investigate this unusual lead. She spent several hours at the Durham home recording Bud's vocalizations and consulting with an avian behavior expert from Michigan State University. Dr. Rebecca Torres, an ornithologist specializing in parrot cognition, explained that African gray parrots are among the most intelligent bird species and are exceptional mimics capable of learning hundreds of words and phrases. More importantly, they tend to repeat sounds and phrases they hear frequently or that occur during moments of high emotion or stress. Dr. Torres noted that the phrases Bud was repeating, particularly in the sequence he was repeating them, were consistent with the bird having witnessed a traumatic confrontation. The parrot would say in what the Durham family confirmed was Martin's voice, "Don't shoot," and "No, Glenna," followed by mimicking argument tones and then a popping sound. While Dr. Torres cautioned that it was impossible to definitively prove the parrot was recreating the actual murder scene, she stated that the pattern was highly suggestive, particularly given that the bird had not exhibited this behavior before the shooting. Detective Chun used this information to take a closer look at Glenna Durham's story. A forensic analysis of the crime scene had already raised some questions. The angles of the gunshot wounds and gunpowder residue patterns were more consistent with Glenna having shot Martin and then turned the gun on herself rather than a third party having shot both of them. Financial records revealed that Glenna had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Martin, and interviews with the couple's friends painted a picture of a marriage far more troubled than Glenna had suggested. with several friends reporting that Glenna had complained bitterly about Martin and had mentioned divorce, though Martin was reportedly reluctant to end the marriage. Cell phone records showed that in the weeks before the shooting, Glenna had been conducting extensive internet searches about life insurance policies, gun ownership, and even one search about how long does someone live after being shot. When confronted with this accumulating evidence, Glenna maintained her innocence, but her story began to show inconsistencies. In December 2016, Glenna Durham was charged with first-degree murder and attempted filing of a false police report. The trial became a media sensation, with much of the attention focused on whether the parrot's vocalizations could be admitted as evidence. The prosecution argued that while the parrot obviously couldn't testify, the phrases it learned demonstrated that it had been present during a confrontation in which Martin pleaded with someone named Glenna not to shoot him. The defense argued strenuously that parrot mimicry was unreliable, that there was no way to establish when the bird learned these phrases, and that allowing such evidence would set a dangerous precedent. Judge Patricia Morrison ultimately ruled that while the parrot's actual vocalizations could not be played for the jury as direct evidence, the prosecution could present testimony about what the parrot said as part of the circumstantial evidence surrounding the case, similar to how a witness might testify about overhearing a conversation. The trial focused heavily on the forensic evidence, the life insurance policy, the internet search history, and witness testimony about the state of the Durham marriage. Martin's mother testified emotionally about Bud's behavior and what she believed it revealed about her son's final moments. The prosecution built a compelling case that Glenna had planned to murder her husband for financial gain and had attempted to disguise the crime as a murder-suicide or home invasion. The defense argued that Glenna's brain injury had genuinely affected her memory and that the circumstantial evidence could be explained by a marriage in crisis that had tragically ended in Martin's suicide and Glenna's own suicide attempt. However, the physical evidence regarding gun angles and residue patterns, combined with the financial motive and internet searches, proved too substantial to overcome. In May 2017, Glenna Durham was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The case sparked widespread debate about the role of animal behavior in legal proceedings and highlighted the various unconventional ways that evidence can emerge in criminal investigations. Bud the parrot, meanwhile, continues to live with Martin's parents, and while he still occasionally repeats phrases from that terrible night, Christina Durham reports that he has also learned new, happier phrases and songs, bringing some small comfort to a family still grieving the loss of their son. Number 3. The Fitbit that told the truth. In December 2015, what began as a reported home invasion in Lancaster, Pennsylvania unraveled into a murder case thanks to data from a fitness tracking device that contradicted the suspect's carefully constructed story. Richard Debate, a 40-year-old computer systems specialist, called 911 in a state of apparent panic on December 23, reporting that an intruder had broken into his home, tied him up, and shot and killed his wife Connie, a 39-year-old pharmaceutical worker and devoted mother to their 2 young sons. When police arrived at the Debate home, they found Richard with superficial burns on his chest and arms, which he claimed were from the intruder using a torch on him, and zip-tied loosely to a folding chair in the basement. Upstairs, officers discovered Connie Debate dead from 2 gunshot wounds. Richard's initial account seemed almost cinematic in its details. He told investigators that he had been working from home that morning while Connie had left to go to the gym, as was her routine. According to Richard, shortly after 9 a.m., he heard a noise and went to investigate, only to encounter a large, camouflage-wearing intruder already inside the house. Richard claimed the intruder attacked him, tied him up, tortured him with a small torch, and then waited for Connie to return home from the gym. When Connie arrived, Richard said he heard her scream and then heard gunshots, after which the intruder fled through the basement door. Richard claimed he eventually managed to free himself and call 911. The story was dramatic and detailed, and Richard appeared genuinely distraught about his wife's death. However, investigators immediately noticed some inconsistencies. Despite claims of a violent struggle and an intruder with a firearm, there was no evidence of forced entry into the home. The zip ties binding Richard were loose enough that he could have easily applied them himself. The burns on his body were relatively minor and superficial, inconsistent with the story of torture. Most importantly, Forensic analysis of the scene suggested that Connie had been shot in the basement, not upstairs where Richard claimed to have heard the attack happen. As investigators dug deeper into the debate's lives, a motive began to emerge. Richard had been having an affair with a younger woman, and his girlfriend was pregnant with his child, with a due date just weeks away. Text messages recovered from Richard's phone showed that he had been telling his mistress he planned to leave his wife, but financial records indicated the couple's assets were largely in Connie's name, and a divorce would have left Richard in a difficult financial position. Additionally, Richard was the primary beneficiary of Connie's substantial life insurance policy. While this provided a clear motive, prosecutors needed to prove that Richard's story was false, and that's where Connie's Fitbit became crucial evidence. Connie was a fitness enthusiast who wore her Fitbit Charge HR almost constantly to track her steps, heart rate, and activity levels. Investigators obtained a warrant to access the data from Connie's Fitbit account, and what they found contradicted Richard's timeline entirely. According to the Fitbit data, Connie's device recorded movement and an elevated heart rate consistent with walking around the house until approximately 10:05 a.m., more than an hour after Richard claimed she had been killed by the intruder. The device showed she had walked approximately 1,200 feet inside the house during this time period, moving between rooms in a pattern consistent with someone doing regular morning activities. Her heart rate data showed normal patterns until approximately 10:05 a.m., when there was a sudden spike and then cessation of all activity, indicating this was when she was actually killed. This data directly contradicted Richard's statement that Connie had been killed shortly after 9 a.m. when she supposedly arrived home from the gym. Moreover, investigators checked with the gym Connie belonged to, and security footage confirmed she had never arrived there that morning. Her Fitbit data showed she had been home the entire time. Cell phone tower data also contradicted Richard's account. He had claimed to be tied up and helpless for an extended period, but his phone records showed he had been sending text messages and accessing the internet during the time he claimed to be restrained. Further investigation revealed that Richard had conducted internet searches about ways to override home security systems and had looked up information about how long it takes for someone to die from gunshot wounds. Confronted with this mounting evidence, Richard's story began to change. He offered various explanations for why his initial account might have been confused due to trauma, but he couldn't explain away the Fitbit data showing his wife was alive and moving about the house an hour after he claimed she'd been killed. In April 2017, Richard DeBate was arrested and charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and making false statements to police. His trial, delayed multiple times due to various legal motions, finally began in 2023. The prosecution presented a compelling case built around the Fitbit data, which they argued provided an objective, precise timeline that completely dismantled Richard's fabricated home invasion story. Digital forensics expert Dr. Michael Cunningham testified extensively about how Fitbit devices record data, the reliability of that data, and how the specific movements and heart rate patterns recorded on Connie's device told the story of her final morning. The defense attempted to argue that Fitbit data could be unreliable, that devices might malfunction or record false information, and that perhaps someone else had been wearing Connie's Fitbit. However, these arguments were undermined by the fact that the device's data aligned perfectly with other evidence, including the actual time of the 911 call, forensic evidence from the crime scene, and cell phone records. The defense also struggled to provide any alternative explanation for why Richard would have lied so extensively to police if he was truly innocent. In May 2023, after a trial that drew national attention to the role of fitness tracker data in criminal investigations, Richard DeBate was convicted of murder and sentenced to 65 years in prison. The case established important legal precedents regarding the admissibility of data from wearable fitness devices and sparked discussions about digital privacy versus law enforcement needs. For the prosecution, the Fitbit data had been invaluable because it provided objective, time-stamped evidence that couldn't be explained away or attributed to witness error or faulty memory. The case demonstrated how the increasing prevalence of personal electronic devices and the Internet of Things creates new avenues for evidence in criminal investigations. Connie DeBate's two sons, who lost their mother and saw their father imprisoned, were placed in the care of Connie's family. Connie's brother, in a victim impact statement read at sentencing, noted the bitter irony that his sister's dedication to health and fitness, symbolized by the Fitbit she wore daily, ultimately became the tool that brought her killer to justice and ensured that Richard could not profit from her death or manipulate the narrative of how she died. Number 4. The Tide Pod Connection. In January 2016, the brutal murder of 18-year-old Kelsey Schaefer in Rochester, New York seemed destined to become another unsolved crime until investigators made an unusual connection through a product that would later become infamous for entirely different reasons: Tide Pods. Kelsey, a freshman at a local community college studying to become a veterinary technician, was found deceased in her off-campus apartment by her roommate who had returned from winter break. Kelsey had stayed in Rochester over the holiday break to work extra shifts at her part-time job at a pet supply store. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and the apartment showed signs of having been ransacked, though valuables including Kelsey's laptop and phone were still present. The investigation initially focused on Kelsey's social circle, her boyfriend, co-workers, and fellow students, but each person had verified alibis for the estimated time of death. Security camera footage from the apartment building's entrance showed no unfamiliar visitors during the relevant time frame, deepening the mystery of who could have committed this crime. The case began to break open when forensic investigators processing the crime scene discovered something unusual on Kelsey's clothing and skin: a distinctive combination of chemicals that didn't match anything typically found in the victim's apartment. Dr. Sarah Mendez, the forensic chemist analyzing trace evidence, identified compounds consistent with a specific formulation of concentrated laundry detergent combined with other household cleaning agents. The chemical signature was very particular, and Dr. Mendez noted that it matched the proprietary formula used in Tide Pods, the pre-measured laundry detergent packets that had become popular for their convenience. This discovery was significant because Kelsey's apartment, according to her roommate, did not have any Tide Pods. Kelsey was allergic to heavy fragrances and used only free and clear detergent products. The presence of these chemicals on Kelsey's body suggested she had been in contact with someone who had Tide Pod residue on their hands or clothing. Investigators began re-examining everyone who had access to the apartment building, including maintenance workers, delivery personnel, and residents. Their attention was drawn to 28-year-old Marcus Webb, a maintenance contractor who performed repairs for several apartment buildings in the area, including Kelsey's. Webb had been interviewed briefly early in the investigation and stated he had not been in the building on the day of the murder. However, building security records showed that Webb's electronic access card had been used to enter the building that afternoon, something he had initially denied. When investigators obtained a warrant to search Webb's home and vehicle, they found multiple containers of Tide Pods in his laundry room, along with a work uniform that showed heavy Tide Pod residue and chemical staining. More significantly, they found items belonging to Kelsey hidden in Webb's garage, including jewelry that had been taken from her apartment. DNA analysis confirmed Webb's DNA under Kelsey's fingernails, evidence of a struggle. Confronted with this evidence, Webb initially maintained his innocence but eventually admitted to being in the apartment building that day, claiming he had gone there to perform routine maintenance. He stated he had encountered Kelsey by chance and they had argued about noise complaints from her apartment, but he denied any involvement in her death. However, his story continued to evolve as more evidence emerged. Forensic analysis of his work clothes revealed Kelsey's blood, and cell phone tower data placed his phone in the vicinity of Kelsey's apartment during the exact timeframe investigators had established for her death. A deeper investigation into Webb's background revealed a troubling pattern. He had been fired from a previous property management job following complaints from female residents about his inappropriate behavior, including entering apartments without proper notice and making unwanted advances. Criminal background checks revealed a previous arrest for attempted assault, though those charges had been reduced through a plea agreement. The Tide Pod evidence proved crucial because it provided a direct link between Webb and Kelsey despite his denials of having had close contact with her. Dr. Mendez explained to the jury during Webb's trial that the specific chemical signature found on Kelsey matched exactly with the formula on Webb's work clothes, and the concentration and pattern of the chemical transfer was consistent with close physical contact or struggle. The prosecution argued that Webb had used his access to the building to enter Kelsey's apartment under the pretense of maintenance work, had sexually assaulted her, and then killed her when she fought back. The theft of some items was likely an attempt to make the crime appear to be a robbery. The defense attempted to argue that the Tide Pod evidence was circumstantial and that Webb's presence in the building, while improperly denied initially, didn't prove he had committed murder. However, the combination of DNA evidence, the victim's stolen property found in his possession, the chemical evidence linking him directly to contact with Kelsey, his false statements to police, and his history of inappropriate behavior toward women created an overwhelming case. In September 2017, Marcus Webb was convicted of first-degree murder, first-degree sexual assault, and burglary. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case prompted changes in how property management companies screen maintenance workers and contractors, with several states implementing more stringent background check requirements and protocols for when workers can enter residential units. Kelsey's mother, Jennifer Schaefer, became an advocate for stronger tenant safety laws and worked with legislators to pass Kelsey's Law in New York, which requires property owners to provide tenants with advance notice of maintenance visits, except in genuine emergencies, and mandates more thorough background screening for anyone given access to residential buildings. The case also highlighted how forensic chemistry had advanced to the point where investigators could identify specific product formulations from trace evidence, providing crucial links in cases where traditional evidence might be limited. Dr. Mendez noted in a later interview that the chemical composition of common household products is so specific that it can serve as a unique identifier, essentially creating a fingerprint that can connect suspects to victims or crime scenes. For Jennifer Schaefer and Kelsey's family, the conviction brought justice but could never restore what they had lost. In victim impact statements, family members described Kelsey as a bright, compassionate young woman who had dreamed of working with animals and who had been taken from them by senseless violence. The fact that such an ordinary household product played a key role in identifying her killer seemed both remarkably fortunate and a reminder of how forensic science continues to evolve, finding evidence in places previous generations of investigators would never have thought to look. Number 5. The pacemaker that recorded a crime in September 2016. A suspicious house fire in Middletown, Ohio led to one of the most unusual pieces of evidence ever used in a criminal trial when prosecutors used data from the defendant's cardiac pacemaker to prove he had set the blaze himself. Ross Compton, a 59-year-old insurance adjuster, called 911 at 6:27 a.m. to report that his house was on fire. When firefighters arrived, they found the home engulfed in flames, with Compton standing outside in his underwear claiming he had barely escaped with his life. Compton told first responders and later investigators that he had been awakened by the smell of smoke, had packed a suitcase with some belongings, had broken out a bedroom window, and had climbed out carrying his suitcase before the flames became too intense. He stated that he believed the fire started from an electrical issue in the kitchen. However, fire investigators from the Ohio State Fire Marshal's office quickly determined that the fire had not started from an electrical malfunction but had been intentionally set using gasoline as an accelerant in multiple locations throughout the house. The burn patterns and the presence of accelerant residue indicated this was clearly arson, not an accident. This finding immediately made Compton himself a suspect, as he was the only person in the home and the only one who would benefit from the insurance payout on the property. But proving arson and proving who set the fire are two different challenges, and Compton maintained his innocence, suggesting perhaps someone had broken in and set the fire while he was asleep, though this explanation seemed implausible given the timeline and the fact that his narrative included packing belongings before escaping. The investigation took a remarkable turn when Detective Mark Wilson learned that Compton had a cardiac pacemaker. The detective consulted with cardiologist Dr. Benjamin Friedman about whether the device could provide any useful information. Dr. Friedman explained that modern pacemakers are sophisticated medical devices that continuously monitor and record a patient's heart rate and cardiac rhythm, storing this data for analysis during medical appointments. The data can show what physical stress the body was under at any given time. Investigators obtained a warrant to access the data from Compton's pacemaker, and Dr. Friedman analyzed the cardiac information recorded during the time frame of the fire. What he found contradicted Compton's story dramatically. The pacemaker data showed that Compton's heart rate and cardiac rhythm during the time he claimed to be sleeping, then frantically packing, breaking a window, and escaping while carrying a suitcase, were far too low to be consistent with such strenuous physical activity. Dr. Friedman testified that the heart rate patterns were more consistent with someone who was awake and moving around but not under significant physical stress or duress. The data suggested Compton's activities were more deliberate and calm than would be expected from someone who had just awoken to find their house on fire and was desperately trying to escape. Furthermore, the heart rate data showed an unusual pattern of activity in the hour before the fire started, consistent with moving around the house and engaging in activity that would align with setting fires in multiple locations and gathering belongings, essentially preparing to stage the scene. Medical experts testified that in a genuine emergency involving smoke inhalation, physical exertion to break windows, and the stress of escaping a burning building while carrying a suitcase, a person's heart rate would be significantly elevated, particularly someone of Compton's age with his cardiac history. The pacemaker data showed no such elevation. Investigators also discovered that Compton had been experiencing significant financial difficulties, had recently increased his homeowner's insurance coverage, and had removed most items of sentimental or significant monetary value from the house in the days before the fire, storing them at a friend's house under the pretense of decluttering. Security camera footage from a nearby gas station showed Compton purchasing a gas can and filling it 2 days before the fire, something he had initially denied when questioned. Further damaging his case, forensic analysis of the clothes and shoes Compton had been wearing revealed traces of gasoline. When confronted with the accumulating evidence, Compton's explanations became increasingly implausible. He claimed the gasoline could have gotten on his clothes from lawn maintenance weeks earlier, but forensic chemists testified that fresh gasoline has a distinct chemical signature different from aged or weathered gasoline, and the residue on his clothing was consistent with very recent exposure. The prosecution built their case around the pacemaker data as the linchpin that disproved Compton's account of frantically escaping the fire. They argued that he had methodically set the fire, had calmly gathered pre-packed belongings, and had exited through the window to make it appear as though he had barely escaped, all in an attempt to collect insurance money to solve his financial problems. In December 2017, Ross Compton was convicted of aggravated arson and insurance fraud. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to his insurance company. The case set a significant legal precedent regarding the use of medical device data in criminal proceedings and raised important questions about privacy versus law enforcement needs. Legal scholars debated whether data from implanted medical devices should be accessible to law enforcement, with privacy advocates expressing concerns about the implications for medical privacy and the Fourth Amendment. However, courts have generally ruled that such data can be obtained with a proper warrant when there is probable cause to believe it contains evidence of a crime. The case also demonstrated how the increasing prevalence of connected devices and sensors that constantly monitor various aspects of our lives creates new categories of evidence that can either support or contradict accounts of events. Dr. Friedman, the cardiologist who analyzed Compton's pacemaker data, noted in later presentations to forensic science conferences that as medical devices become more sophisticated and more people have implanted monitors for various conditions, law enforcement will likely increasingly turn to such devices as sources of objective data about what a person was doing and experiencing at crucial times. The Ohio State Fire Marshal's Office now routinely inquires about whether suspects or victims in fire investigations have any implanted medical devices that might provide relevant data. For the insurance company that narrowly avoided paying out on a fraudulent claim, the case demonstrated the importance of thorough investigation even when initial reports seemed straightforward. Compton's conviction was appealed unsuccessfully, with appellate courts ruling that the pacemaker data had been obtained with a valid warrant based on probable cause and that the data was relevant and material to the charges. He remains incarcerated and continues to maintain his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence, including the irrefutable data from the device that was keeping his heart beating, and ultimately helped prove his guilt. Number 6. The deleted Snapchat that wasn't really deleted in July 2017. The murder of 17-year-old Maya Wells in Indianapolis, Indiana showcased how digital forensics has evolved to recover evidence even from platforms designed to make content disappear, ultimately leading to justice for a young woman whose life was cut tragically short. Maya was a popular high school senior, cheerleader, and honor student who had recently been accepted to Indiana University with plans to study psychology. On the evening of July 15th, she told her parents she was going to meet friends at a local mall, a routine outing that her family had no reason to worry about. When she didn't return home by her curfew and didn't answer text messages or phone calls, her parents contacted police. Officers located Maya's car in the mall parking lot, but there was no sign of Maya herself. Her purse and phone were found inside the locked vehicle, which immediately suggested something was seriously wrong. The following morning, a utility worker discovered Maya's body in a wooded area approximately 10 miles from the mall. She had been beaten and strangled, and her body showed signs of sexual assault. The investigation began with reviewing surveillance footage from the mall, which showed Maya arriving as she had told her parents she would. However, approximately 40 minutes later, footage captured Maya leaving the mall with a young man and getting into a vehicle in the parking lot. The image quality made it difficult to identify the individual, but investigators noticed Maya appeared to be going willingly, suggesting she knew this person. The breakthrough came from Maya's phone. Digital forensics specialist detective James Morrison accessed Maya's Snapchat account and discovered that in the hours before she went to the mall, she had been communicating with someone through the app. Snapchat, designed to have messages and images disappear after they're viewed, posed a significant challenge. However, Detective Morrison knew that while Snapchat content disappears from devices, metadata about communications can sometimes be recovered, and Snapchat itself retains certain information on its servers for legal purposes. Through a warrant served on Snapchat, investigators obtained records showing that Maya had been in communication with an account belonging to 19-year-old Derek Watkins, someone Maya's parents confirmed was a former boyfriend. The relationship had ended several months earlier, reportedly because Derek had become increasingly possessive and controlling, behaviors that had made Maya uncomfortable. Friends confirmed that Derek had not taken the breakup well and had continued to try to contact Maya despite her asking him to leave her alone. While the Snapchat metadata showed communication between Maya and Derek's account, the actual content of the messages had been automatically deleted by the platform's design. However, Detective Morrison discovered something Derek hadn't counted on: a feature in Snapchat that allows users to save certain messages if both parties agree. Examining Maya's phone more carefully, investigators found that several messages from their conversation had been saved, though not all of them. The recovered messages showed Derek asking Maya to meet him at the mall, claiming he had something important to tell her and promising it would be brief. Maya's responses showed reluctance but eventual agreement, likely driven by a desire to avoid further conflict or perhaps to provide closure to a relationship that had ended badly. Even more significantly, Detective Morrison was able to work with digital forensics experts to recover data that Derek thought he had deleted from his own phone. While Derek had removed the Snapchat app and cleared his phone's memory, forensic recovery tools were able to reconstruct portions of cached data that had been stored temporarily on the device. This included fragments of images and text that showed Derek had taken screenshots of some of Maya's Snapchat photos without her knowledge, something the app is designed to notify users about but which can be circumvented through various methods. These recovered images showed an obsessive documentation of Maya's social media presence. Investigators also recovered deleted text messages from Derek's phone to friends in the days before Maya's death in which he expressed anger about her moving on with her life and how she had disrespected him by dating someone else. One particularly chilling message read, "She's going to regret treating me like nothing." When questioned, Derek initially denied having seen Maya the night she disappeared, but surveillance footage from the mall confirmed he was the person seen leaving with her. Cell phone tower data placed both Derek's phone and Maya's phone together traveling from the mall area toward where her body was eventually found, and then showed Derek's phone traveling back alone. Derek's vehicle, which he had claimed was in the shop for repairs that evening, was in fact operational, and forensic examination of the vehicle revealed traces of Maya's blood in the trunk and DNA evidence confirming she had been in the car. Confronted with this overwhelming evidence, Derek's attorney attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but prosecutors were determined to take the case to trial given the premeditated nature of the crime and the evidence of planning. In March 2018, Derek Watkins was tried for first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. The prosecution presented the digital evidence from Snapchat, the recovered messages and images, the surveillance footage, forensic evidence from Derek's vehicle, and testimony from Maya's friends about Derek's controlling behavior and inability to accept the end of their relationship. Digital forensics expert Dr. Patricia Huang testified extensively about how data recovery works, explaining to the jury that even when users believe they have deleted content or when platforms like Snapchat are designed to make content disappear, digital traces often remain and can be recovered with proper forensic techniques. She walked the jury through the process of recovering the cache data from Derek's phone and obtaining records from Snapchat servers, demystifying the technology in a way that made the evidence accessible to lay people. The defense attempted to argue that the digital evidence could have been manipulated or was unreliable, but Dr. Huang's testimony about the forensic protocols used, the chain of custody for the devices, and the verification methods employed proved compelling. The defense also struggled to explain away the physical evidence from Derek's vehicle and his demonstrable lies to police about his whereabouts. In April 2018, Derek Watkins was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case attracted significant attention from digital privacy advocates and technology companies, highlighting the ongoing tension between privacy protections built into platforms and law enforcement's need to access evidence of crimes. Snapchat, in response to this and similar cases, has worked to clarify its policies regarding law enforcement requests and has improved its cooperation with legitimate investigations while still maintaining its commitment to user privacy in the normal course of platform use. For Maya Wells' family, the conviction brought a measure of justice, though it could never restore their daughter or erase the trauma of her loss. Maya's mother, Patricia Wells, became an advocate for educating young people about recognizing signs of unhealthy relationships and the importance of taking seriously when partners exhibit controlling or obsessive behaviors. She has spoken at schools throughout Indiana, sharing Maya's story as a cautionary tale about the potential dangers of not recognizing red flags in relationships. The case also demonstrated to young people that communications they believe are private or temporary can be recovered and used as evidence, a lesson that has implications both for criminal justice and for understanding digital footprints more broadly. Detective Morrison has since become a sought-after expert on digital forensics in criminal investigations and regularly trains other law enforcement personnel on techniques for recovering digital evidence from various platforms and devices. Number 7. The Apple Watch that tracked a kidnapping in March 2018. What began as a terrifying abduction in San Jose, California was resolved thanks to the GPS and health monitoring data from an Apple Watch, showcasing how wearable technology has become an invaluable tool for law enforcement in cases where time is of the essence. Rebecca Chong, a 32-year-old software engineer, was abducted at gunpoint from a parking garage at her workplace in the early evening as she was leaving for the day. A witness saw a man force Rebecca into a white van at gunpoint and immediately called 911, but by the time police arrived, the van had fled the scene. The witness had not been able to get the license plate number, and the parking garage security cameras had malfunctioned, meaning there was no video footage of the abduction. Rebecca's car was found in the parking garage with her purse inside but no sign of her phone, which she had apparently been carrying when she was taken. With no vehicle identification, no clear suspect, and no phone to track, investigators faced a race against time in a case where statistics show that victims of stranger abductions face grave danger with each passing hour. However, Rebecca's colleague and close friend mentioned to police that Rebecca always wore her Apple Watch, as she was an avid runner who used it to track her workouts and health metrics. This information immediately changed the trajectory of the investigation. Detective Sarah Patel contacted Apple's legal team to request access to Rebecca's Apple Watch data. Apple cooperated quickly given the emergency circumstances, and the company was able to provide real-time GPS tracking data from the watch, which was still active and transmitting. The data showed movement from the parking garage heading north on Highway 101, the major freeway running through the Bay Area. Police were able to track the watch's location as it moved, and the GPS coordinates were updated every few minutes, as long as the device had a connection. The tracking data showed the vehicle had traveled approximately 60 miles north of San Jose and had exited the freeway in a rural area. Local law enforcement in that jurisdiction was immediately contacted, and patrol units began converging on the location indicated by the watch's GPS. The coordinates showed the watch had stopped moving at a specific property, a remote farmhouse on several acres of land. Property records revealed the location was owned by 45-year-old Gerald McBride, who had no apparent connection to Rebecca. A background check revealed McBride had a criminal history including prior convictions for assault and attempted kidnapping from 15 years earlier. He had served his sentence and been released on parole several years ago, but the combination of his location, criminal history, and the GPS evidence placing Rebecca's watch at his property provided enough probable cause for immediate action. A tactical team was deployed to the property approximately 4 hours after Rebecca's initial abduction. The operation had to be carefully planned because the watch's data showed it was stationary inside a structure on the property, suggesting Rebecca might be held in a building, and any precipitous action could endanger her life. However, the health monitoring data from the Apple Watch provided additional crucial information. Rebecca's heart rate was elevated but stable, suggesting she was alive and her watch was still on her wrist rather than having been removed and discarded. Using this information, the tactical team surrounded the property and made contact with McBride, who initially denied anyone else was present. However, officers could see the white van described by the witness parked behind the farmhouse. After a tense standoff, officers executed a forced entry and found Rebecca bound and gagged in a basement room but physically unharmed. McBride was immediately taken into custody. The investigation revealed a chilling plot. McBride had been surveilling Rebecca for several weeks after becoming obsessed with her when he encountered her at a coffee shop near her workplace. Security footage from the coffee shop, reviewed after McBride's arrest, showed multiple instances of him watching Rebecca and appearing to follow her when she left. McBride admitted during interrogation that he had planned the abduction meticulously, including choosing the parking garage because he had observed that security cameras in that area were unreliable. What he had not anticipated was that Rebecca would be wearing a device that would broadcast her location in real time. The Apple Watch data proved crucial not only in locating Rebecca but also in building the case against McBride. The GPS timeline established exactly when and where she had been taken and tracked her movement to McBride's property. The health data from the watch provided evidence that could have been critical had the case gone to trial regarding Rebecca's physical state during the ordeal. Cell phone tower data from McBride's phone confirmed he had been in the area of Rebecca's workplace at the time of the abduction and showed his phone traveling along the same route as Rebecca's watch back to his property. In January 2019, Gerald McBride pleaded guilty to kidnapping, assault, and false imprisonment in exchange for prosecutors agreeing not to pursue additional charges that carried potential life sentences. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison. The case became a landmark example of how wearable technology, initially designed for fitness and health monitoring, has evolved into an important safety tool. Apple and other technology companies have since emphasized the safety features of their wearable devices in their marketing, and many people cite cases like Rebecca's as motivation for wearing such devices consistently. Rebecca Chong, who declined to speak publicly about her ordeal for some time, eventually participated in a documentary about her case in 2021. She emphasized that while the technology had saved her life, the swift action of law enforcement and the witness who immediately called 911 were equally crucial factors in her rescue. She noted that the psychological trauma of the abduction had been significant, requiring extensive therapy, but she felt fortunate to have survived when so many abduction victims do not. Detective Patel, who led the investigation, has since given presentations at law enforcement conferences about the importance of quickly identifying what technology a victim might have been carrying or wearing. She emphasizes that in the crucial early hours of a kidnapping investigation, real-time data from devices like smartwatches can mean the difference between life and death. The case also prompted discussions about privacy and surveillance, with some civil liberties advocates expressing concerns about the implications of location tracking technology. However, most legal scholars and privacy experts have agreed that in emergency situations involving potential harm to individuals, the ability to access such data with appropriate legal authorization represents a reasonable balance between privacy interests and public safety. Technology companies have since developed more streamlined protocols for responding to emergency law enforcement requests, while still maintaining appropriate safeguards against overreach. For Rebecca Chang's family and friends, the technology that enabled her rescue seemed almost miraculous. Her father, in a statement read at McBride's sentencing, noted that a device originally purchased to help his daughter track her running pace had instead tracked her location during the most terrifying experience of her life and brought police to her before irreversible harm could occur. The case stands as a powerful example of how everyday consumer technology, designed for convenience and health monitoring, can become a crucial tool for justice and safety in circumstances no one anticipates but everyone hopes they never face.